I can't remember whether we were smoking or not. I'm non-smoker. Although in the gliders during training many of us have been sick, nobody was worse than I was. On that night, I don't think anybody was sick. Whether it was because it was a particularly calm flight or whether it was because we were too worried to be sick, I don't know. But I can assure you all, we were all bloody scared. And anybody, yes, and who can't, and anybody who says they were not scared on an occasion like that is either a fool or a damn liar. Before we cast off, I imagine that everybody said a little prayer to themselves, although that was nothing to what when we actually came in. Now we imagine now that the glider pilot has given us the signal that we're casting off, and everything was intensely quiet at that moment. Right, we've cast off, and immediately there's a different sound altogether. Instead of the air rushing past us, being towed by the Halifax bomber, it turns to a swish, a very silent sort of swish. And the glider pilot was then at 6,000 feet, started his descent. Fast at first, and but not too fast, because we were slightly overloaded. Well, we were very badly overloaded in some cases. In fact, so much so that we had tipped out a couple of men and told them they couldn't go almost at the last moment, much to their sorrow, I might add, because we thought that we would need the ammunition in case the paras who were due to relieve us did not turn up on the time we expected. The paras were due to land half an hour after we sprang the bridges. So we go back to what's happening in the glider now. We are gradually leveling out at something like 2,000 feet. Another tip from the glider pilot, all ranged before, that we would open the doors. Now the doors in those gliders, there was one in the front and one in the back. And in the front it was right opposite me, or more opposite Den Brotheridge, the platoon commander, who was sitting on my left. And the chap who we didn't know then, of course, was to be the first to be killed, and that is, unless the man who was thrown into the pond was killed first. We're never very sure about that. We opened the doors by Den Brotheridge undoing his safety belt. We had safety belts but no parachutes, and leaning forward while the sergeant on one side and myself on the other held on to his equipment very precariously. He leaned forward and opened the door, which lifted up and opened into the roof. And I can well remember sitting looking through the door. It was a half moonlight night, a bit lighter than it is tonight, and as soon as we got to about 1,000 feet, I could recognize exactly where we were through the aerial photographs I'd studied for 6 weeks back in United Kingdom. Aerial photographs, and you could recognize the shapes of villages, the shapes of woods, and I knew we were absolutely on course. In fact, the glider pilot kept putting his thumbs up, and everybody in the glider who was sitting facing one another could see that he was doing it. At about this time, we did the first right-hand turn. We'd taken off over Coburg, the coast, come straight down towards Caen, which we could see through the cockpit, because the cockpit was on my right, that Caen was in flames. It had been heavily bombed, and we'd come over with what was known then as a 1,000-bomber raid. And as we did the turn, the first turn short of Caen, because we came straight down, then did a right-hand turn, another right-hand turn to come into the landing zone here in this direction. So we came from up there. We did the first turn and a very short leg for the second turn, leaving Caen on our left, and then another turn as we came in from that direction up there. And as we did the second turn, he was probably down to 300 or 400 feet. And as we turned, I saw the canal for the first time. The half moonlight night was lighting up the canal. Now, on this side of the landing zone, was a row of very high trees. On that side, of course, was the pond, and the glider pilot knew that he had to get in between. If one wing caught one of those trees as he came in, then of course we would have just gone straight down into the ground. We're now at about 200 feet. The trees are rushing past us. We know we're on course because most of us through the doors had seen the canal swishing past us, and in those glides we were probably doing just over 100 miles an hour at that time, still airborne. But it was a well-known fact that when you actually touch down, you're doing around 90 miles an hour. We're still at about 100 feet at this moment, with the canal on our left and seeing the trees rush past. We knew from studying the photographs, aerial photographs of this tiny field, that it was going to be a rough landing. And even in the United Kingdom, where we always on training landed on airfields, there were always a few accidents of overrunning or landing too soon. All sorts of things can happen in those enormous gliders capable of carrying 30 men with their equipment. We are still at about 100 feet, coming down towards here from the corner at the back towards this thing, and suddenly there was a hell of a bump, and we knew that we had lost the wheels, and we would be landing on metal skids. The skids were immediately under the glider, and in emergency when the wheels went, we knew that we were landing on them. As we touched down, the wheels left and we were airborne again, just for a couple of seconds, perhaps even less, and then zip again. This time it was very, very shuddery, hell of a noise because we were on the skids. And through the open door in front of me, I saw what I thought were tracer bullets, and concluded that if we were really near the bridge, the enemy had been alerted and were firing bullets at us, because when you fire at night, about every third or fourth bullet is always a tracer bullet to give the man firing it a direction. It wasn't tracers. We didn't hear the usual whip you hear of a round, but it must have been, we concluded, sparks from the skids hitting stones on the ground as we came in. And I think ourselves, we realized at the time that's all they were, because as I say, we couldn't hear the whip of a bullet. We thumped twice like that, although Jim Warwick, when he speaks, always insists he made a correct three-point landing right in the corner of the field. He always argues that it was an absolute perfect landing. But these chaps here behind me know that it really was a thump and thump and thump like that. Now, what were our thoughts? We knew from aerial photographs that they were putting up anti-air landing poles. The Germans, under General Rommel, were strengthening the defences all along this coast, and we knew that these posts are here. Although the glider pilots had said, Jim Warwick in particular, that we'd take this much off this wing and that much off this wing, and it'll pull us up before we get to the end of this landing zone, where there's an embankment, as you know, up to the road. And he was dead scared of hitting that embankment. And one of the grenades in our pouches, which had all been detonated, and would have exploded on impact, and not only that grenade, but also every bit of explosive in the glider would have gone up. The thing we were most afraid of is a machine gun firing at us as we came in or as we came to a standstill, because there are only two doors. We've got to get out of that glider, and back in UK we had practiced and practiced and practiced. Now in those gliders you're sitting facing one another like in old-fashioned trams and buses. You're in your safety belts, you link arms, butcher's grip, and lift up your legs and just pray to hell, because we know they're all in the hands of the glider pilot. As we came to a hell of a halt, I suddenly found that I was blinded, I thought, but all that's happened was my battle bowler had come down over my eyes and I couldn't see the door. I pushed it up and saw that the door had disappeared. It's a telescope. And at that moment we landed at 0016 hours.